Yeah, he said, well, man, he said, it's time for you to come to work for me and be my bodyguard security, and I want you to clean us up and get us off of this shit we're on and take care of us and straighten us up. And I heard somebody say, trees, and that was the first top of the trees that the plane hit, and I turned to head back to my seat. And I told him right there on that runway, I says,
45 years have passed since the tragic plane crash that claimed the lives of several Lynyrd Skynyrd members. But Gene Odom is breaking his silence with shocking new revelations. As a survivor and close friend to the band, Odom has carried untold truths for decades, until now. His explosive account sheds fresh light on the fateful night that forever altered rock history. The details he reveals will challenge everything we thought we knew about that tragic event. And just when you think you've heard it all, Odom's revelations will leave you questioning even more. On that fateful day, Gene Odom found himself at the heart of one of rock music's most tragic moments. The crash that claimed the lives of members of Lynyrd Skynyrd, including Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, and Dean Kilpatrick, left an indelible scar on his soul. Gene, a friend, confidant, and bodyguard to the band, was thrust into a nightmare that would forever change his life.
sad situation. And I was, I was panicky, freaking out. I was just pissed off about being in that situation.
The story begins with an ominous sign. The airplane's engines start to fail mid-flight. What initially seemed like a minor technical issue quickly spiraled into a full-blown catastrophe. At first, it was just one engine, stuttering and losing power. Yet within moments, both engines failed, plunging the band into unimaginable peril. The cause? A fatal oversight. The plane was out of fuel. The pilots had failed to check and ensure there was enough fuel to complete the flight. It was a mistake so basic, yet so deadly. The realization hit hard, and panic set in among the passengers.
The plane was running out of gas. The pilots found out they screwed up and ran out of gas.
Gene, deeply alarmed, rushed to the cockpit, his heart pounding with fear. He demanded answers, seeking to understand just how bad the situation had become. The pilots, pale with fear, admitted the truth. The aircraft, already weighed down by passengers and equipment, was rapidly descending. Gene knew the consequences of flying a plane with no fuel were dire, an uncontrolled plunge toward the ground. As the plane began its descent, the atmosphere turned from one of confusion to sheer terror. Altitude was lost rapidly, the Earth drawing nearer with every passing second. The plane, now little more than a powerless glider, sliced through the air at a steep angle. In those horrifying moments, the passengers clung to hope, praying for a miracle. But then, the first jarring impact came, as the aircraft collided with the treetops of a dense Mississippi forest. That split-second impact, the trees clawing at the fragile metal of the plane, tore through the silence. Gene felt the full weight of the unfolding disaster. He couldn't understand why the pilots had even continued the flight after the engine began to falter. Had they been too confident, too reckless? These thoughts raced through his mind, but there was no time for reflection, only survival.
Top of the trees that the plane hit, and I turned to head back to my seat. And I told him right there on that runway, I says, that's not going to make any sense to have an engine problem and fly with it.
With the plane now resting in pieces amidst the wreckage of the forest, the scene was one of chaos. Screams filled the air, and the once iconic members of Lynyrd Skynyrd lay amongst the debris, some beyond saving. Gene, battered and injured himself, attempted to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. Amidst the chaos, one person, miraculously unscathed, made a startling decision. Instead of helping, this individual sought safety, hiding away while others fought for their lives. Hours would pass before this person reappeared, unwilling or unable to offer help when it was most needed. In the moments following the crash, Gene was struck by the sight of his friend, Ronnie Van Zant. Ronnie, the charismatic and influential lead singer, had sustained what appeared to be minimal injuries, a small cut and a broken leg.
Ronnie Van Zant had an eighth-inch nick and a fractured leg in a bone in his leg.
His father, when he first arrived at the scene, even mistook Ronnie's unconscious state for a peaceful slumber. But this was far from the truth. Ronnie had suffered far worse than anyone could have imagined. His injuries were fatal, and the grim realization shattered everyone who knew him. Equipment, luggage, and the shattered remains of the aircraft lay in a tangled mess. Beneath the wreckage, Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, Dean Kirkpatrick and Ronnie Van Zant were found, lives cut short, dreams ended. The weight of loss hit Gene in waves, overwhelming him. He had lost his best friends, people who had become his family. The shock, however, took time to sink in. He was dealing with his own injuries, not just physical, but emotional too. Trauma has a way of creeping up on you, slowly suffocating your ability to move forward. For Gene, this would be a battle he would face for years to come. In the aftermath, rescue teams arrived, but nothing could reverse the damage already done. The image of the wrecked airplane, now a monument to tragedy, stood as a reminder of how fragile life can be. Gene would later recount that it wasn't just the physical injuries from the crash that haunted him, but the guilt and the anger. Why hadn't more been done to prevent this? How had something as simple as checking the fuel levels been overlooked? These questions tormented him long after the crash. It wasn't until he visited Ronnie's grave for the first time that the full gravity of the loss settled in. The shock of the crash had numbed him for a while, but standing there, facing the final resting place of a man he had looked up to, Gene felt the full weight of grief.
Yeah, I'm still mad about it. It still pisses me off. For a while, it was a big shock. I mean, I was real upset that he didn't make it. Still am upset that he didn't make it, you know, and really I kind of like, probably deep down inside, I blame myself a whole lot.
It was a moment of finality. The whirlwind of media attention, the chaos of rescue efforts, and the constant replaying of the events in his mind all came to a halt as he faced the cold stone marker. This was real. His friends were gone, and nothing would bring them back. Sometimes it's not the storm that changes you. It's the calm after it, Gene would later say, reflecting on his healing journey. His grief transformed over time into a complex mixture of sorrow, guilt, and determination to honor the memory of those he lost. He knew that he had survived for a reason, and that reason would be to ensure the story of his friends, their music, and their legacy would never be forgotten. The Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash was more than just an accident. It was a heartbreaking result of human mistakes and bad luck, leading to a profound legacy. Their music, embodying the bonds and dreams of the band members, continues to motivate people across generations. For Gene Odom, the crash split his life into before and after September 1977. Over time, Gene wrestled with his emotions, finding comfort in sharing his experiences to keep the memory of his lost friends alive. While the crash claimed lives, it also cemented Lynyrd Skynyrd's enduring spirit, with their songs cherished by millions. The sky was calm as the twin-engine Convair plane carried 25 souls on what was supposed to be a routine flight. Among those on board were members of the legendary southern rock band Lynyrd Skynyrd, on their way to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for another concert on their tour. It was a normal day, filled with the usual banter, plans for the show, and the lingering excitement that always comes with life on the road. But beneath that calm exterior, a ticking time bomb was already set in motion. The plane had one fatal flaw. There wasn't enough fuel to make it to their destination. As the engine sputtered, the crew and passengers quickly became aware that something was terribly wrong. The co-pilot, in a voice that struggled to mask his own fear, announced the dire news to the passengers. The plane was running out of fuel, and they needed to prepare for an emergency landing. Fear swept through the cabin like a cold wind, chilling everyone to their core. Panic set in, but so did disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not to them.
Before it crashed was you're in so much shock or disbelief, and at the same time belief, and oh my God, it's true.
Some passengers, unaware of the danger, kept playing poker, a reflection of the relaxed nature of private flights. But as the reality set in, people buckled up, prayed, or sat in stunned silence, bracing for the inevitable crash. Then, the unthinkable happened. The plane hit treetops, the impact brutal, sending it crashing into the swampy woods of southwest Mississippi. Metal tore apart, and the air filled with screams. When the dust settled, the scene was one of devastation. Wreckage scattered in a swamp turned graveyard. Survivors awoke to a war zone, dazed, bleeding, and barely conscious. Gene Odom, one of the band's closest companions, found himself trapped under a piece of the plane's wreckage. His cries for help echoed through the chaos. In the midst of the wreckage, he saw Dean Kirkpatrick, the band's road manager come to his aid. Dean, who was gravely injured himself, somehow managed to lift the heavy debris off Gene, a feat that Gene later realized was impossible for a man in Dean's condition. To this day, Gene believes that what he saw was not Dean's physical form, but rather his spirit, helping him to survive the nightmare.
A doctor told me that the way he came in, he couldn't have done that, what happened to him. So it was his spirit. So I believe in that.
The crash claimed the lives of 6 people, among them Ronnie Van Zant, the charismatic frontman and heartbeat of Lynyrd Skynyrd. Ronnie's loss hit the survivors the hardest. He was more than just a bandmate. He was a brother, a leader. 20 others, including guitarist Gary Rossington, miraculously survived. But survival did not come without its price. The physical injuries were severe, but the emotional scars ran far deeper. In the aftermath, many of the survivors, including Gene, were haunted by the memories of that fateful day. The nightmares that followed were relentless, dragging him back into the wreckage night after night, as if the crash was replaying in his mind on an endless loop. Gene seldom spoke about these nightmares. To the outside world, he put on a brave face. But inside, the pain of loss and survivor's guilt consumed him. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that swamp, hearing the cries of his fallen friends, reliving the helplessness that he'd felt as the plane went down. These were the burdens he carried, quietly and without complaint. Years after the crash, Gene's life changed when Gary Rossington called with surprising news: a tribute tour to honor Lynyrd Skynyrd's legacy. It was a chance to keep their music alive and to remember those lost. Within a week, Gene went from driving trucks to being signed by Atlantic Records. The tribute tour was more than a memorial. It was a revival, giving the band's music a second life. The transition was swift. One moment Gene was grieving. The next, he was back in the rock world, preparing to take the stage again. In life, second chances don't come often. And when they do, they are a gift, one that must be cherished. For Gene, this was that second chance. The tribute tour wasn't just about playing the old songs. It was about celebrating the legacy of a band that had been cut down in its prime, but refused to be forgotten. The music of Lynyrd Skynyrd, with its southern roots and raw emotion, lived on through every note, every chord, every lyric. As the tour kicked off, fans came in droves, eager to pay tribute to the band that had given them so much. The concerts were more than just performances. They were emotional journeys. Each song was a reminder of the lives that had been lost, but also of the resilience of those who survived. For Gene, standing on that stage, looking out at the crowd, was a powerful moment. He knew that Ronnie, Steve, Cassie, and the others were with him in spirit. Their legacy was alive in the music, and as long as the music played, they would never truly be gone.
Sweet home Alabama, where the skies are blue.
The crash had changed everything in an instant, but in the end, it didn't define them. Lynyrd Skynyrd's music had transcended tragedy. The band's legacy was one of survival, perseverance, and a refusal to let the past hold them back. And in that legacy, there was hope, not just for those who survived the crash, but for anyone who has ever faced unimaginable loss. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't surviving the storm. It's learning how to live after it. For Gene Odom, that lesson came in the most painful of ways. But through it all, he never stopped believing in the power of music and in the enduring spirit of those he lost.
At the time, I didn't know I was going to call it a song. It was a poem. And it was exactly...
Lynyrd Skynyrd's story, like their music, will continue to echo through time. A reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, there is always a path forward. Lynyrd Skynyrd's association with the Confederate flag has long been a topic of debate in the rock music world. In the 70s, the flag was a regular part of their performances, symbolizing Southern pride and their rebellious spirit as a Southern rock band. It was a visual representation of their roots, culture, and defiance, particularly when they were restricted from performing in certain Southern states. However, over time, the meaning of the flag shifted. What once symbolized regional pride began to evoke a painful history of racism and oppression for many, particularly African American fans. As the band's music, influenced by blues, a genre with deep African American roots, continued to resonate, Lynyrd Skynyrd began to recognize that the use of the flag was unintentionally causing harm. The band found themselves at a crossroads, torn between their heritage and the growing awareness that their use of the flag was upsetting to some of their fans. They didn't want to alienate anyone, especially not the people who had supported them for so long. At the same time, they felt a strong connection to their Southern identity, something they were proud of and had built their career on. In interviews, the band had expressed their deep regret over the fact that the Confederate flag has become associated with hate groups.
Show up like that, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But we're still so proud to be Southern and to fly the Dixie flag, that's fine.
They are quick to point out that their intent has never been to offend or divide their audience. Instead, they see the flag as a nod to their roots, a way to express their love for the South, a region rich in culture, history, and music. But they also understand that the world is changing, and symbols that once seemed harmless now carry a different weight. Lynyrd Skynyrd acknowledges the complexity of the Confederate flag's meaning. While its presence in their shows has decreased, Johnny Van Zant still uses it sparingly, aware of the potential backlash. This reflects the ongoing tension between honoring their Southern heritage and respecting the diverse fan base. Balancing history is difficult, as symbols mean different things to different people. Lynyrd Skynyrd navigates this tension by recognizing the discomfort surrounding the flag while staying true to their roots. For them, Southern pride goes beyond the flag. It's about family, tradition, and the way of life that defines them. They talk openly about their Southern lifestyle, from eating grits to using phrases like y'all, and they embrace these elements of their identity without apology. But they also recognize that times have changed. As society becomes more aware of the impact of symbols like the Confederate flag, Lynyrd Skynyrd is learning how to balance their personal pride with the need to be sensitive to their fans' experiences. For Lynyrd Skynyrd, the Confederate flag will always be a part of their history, but it doesn't define who they are. They are a band that has built a legacy on their music, not on the symbols they once used. As they continue to perform and evolve, they are mindful of the changing world around them, and they are committed to ensuring that their music brings people together, rather than pushing them apart. The ongoing conversation about the flag and Lynyrd Skynyrd's music is a reflection of the broader cultural shifts happening in society. It's about learning how to honor the past while moving forward, about understanding that symbols can change meaning over time. For Lynyrd Skynyrd, their legacy will always be about the music, their passion, their pride, and their deep connection to the South. But they know that being Southern is more than just a flag. It's about the values they hold, the people they love, and the music that continues to inspire generations.
Southern lean